You lived a life you cannot remember. You were born. You tasted your first milk. You felt sunlight on a cheek you didn't yet know was yours. You learned to crawl, then to walk. You spoke your first word, and most of it is gone. Not because your baby's brain was broken, because it had a different job, a much stranger job. It was building the person you would become. Think of memory as a house. Adults store moments in rooms we can visit again. Babies were not empty rooms. They were a demolition crew, clearing space to build that house. To understand why your earliest scenes evaporated, we need three things: the biology of a baby brain, the psychological growth of a self, and the language that frames experience. Each piece matters. Together they explain the vanishing. Start with the biology. The hippocampus is central. It sits deep in the temporal lobe and helps turn minutes into memories you can later recall. In adults, a network forms between the hippocampus and the cortex. That network tags, stores, and retrieves episodes, birthdays, conversations, the smell of rain. In infants, that network is still under construction. Connections are forming. Gateways are wiring up. The dentate gyrus, a small but crucial region that channels new information, is immature during the first years of life. But immaturity is only part of the story. Babies do learn. Psychologists showed this decades ago. In a classic experiment, infants who had a ribbon attached to their ankle learned that kicking made a mobile move. They repeated the kicking. 2-month-olds remembered for a couple of days. 6-month-olds remembered for weeks. The infant mind can encode and retrieve. It does not lack the capacity to notice or learn. What it lacks is stability. Here is the surprising twist. The very growth that creates your mature brain also erases the traces of what came before. In the first years of life, the hippocampus produces new neurons at an extraordinary rate. This process is neurogenesis. New neurons are essential. They help wire circuits that support learning, flexibility, and future memory. But every time a new neuron integrates into a circuit, it changes the wiring. Those changes sometimes disrupt existing connections. The synapses that supported early memories are reshaped. In animal experiments, increasing neurogenesis in adults caused them to forget things sooner. Slowing neurogenesis in infant animals let early memories persist longer. The conclusion is unsettling and elegant. To grow the brain that will carry you, your brain writes over some of its earliest notes. That alone would explain a lot. But it still leaves a deeper question. What counts as a living memory? There are different types. Procedural memories: how to hold a spoon, how to balance, can survive. Emotional learning: comfort with a caregiver. Fear of a particular sound can thread into later life. These are not episodic first-person memories. They are habits and responses. What people usually mean when they say, "I remember being a baby," is autobiographical memory. That's the kind of memory where you are the main character. You replay an event in your mind and think, "That happened to me." Autobiographical memory needs more than neural tissue. It needs a self. Developmental psychologists have long noticed a coincidence. The ability to recognize yourself, to experience yourself as a persisting person, appears around the same time autobiographical memories begin to stick. One way researchers test this is simple and gentle. They put a small mark on a toddler's face and then show them a mirror. Very young infants treat the mirror as another child. They don't touch their own face. Sometime between roughly 18 and 24 months, many children reach for the dot on their own nose. They see the reflection and understand at some level, that is me. That dawning sense of self is not merely an interesting milestone. It reorganizes experience. Before self-recognition, events are felt as isolated sensory streams: textures, sounds, the warmth of a lap. There is no narrator inside to place the moment in a life story, no I to which the moment belongs. Once a primitive narrative sense exists, the mind can begin to paste moments together into a chain that can be replayed later. Without that chain, memories are harder to access later, even if some physical trace once existed. Language is the next stabilizer. Words give structure. They provide labels, dates, characters, and causal links. A memory without language is raw sensation. It is rich in color and feeling, but it lacks a skeleton. Around the age when children acquire language, families typically start to talk about the past. They ask questions. They tell stories. Do you remember when we went to the park? Those conversations teach a child how to convert experience into narrative. They model the questions that later will cue recall. Who, where, when, how did you feel? Cross-cultural studies make this very clear. The timing of first memories differs across cultures in ways that track parenting practices and storytelling styles. In cultures where parents habitually narrate and elaborate on a child's experiences, children tend to report earlier first memories. When parents focus less on the personal or the self, and more on group or situational details, earliest memories come later. The point is not that some cultures produce better memories. The point is that social interaction shapes how memories are encoded and later accessed. So now we have three linked forces. The infant brain is physically remodeling itself. New neurons disrupt earlier circuits. The narrative self is slowly emerging, and only around that time can experiences be organized as mine. Language provides tools to frame, tag, and rehearse memories. The result is a natural gap in autobiographical memory. It is not a failure. It is a trade-off. That trade-off has emotional consequences. People often feel haunted by the blank. They can look at baby photos and feel a sharp, private distance from the child in the picture. The question comes softly and then more loudly. Is that child me? Did that child die when I was rebuilt? These are normal, almost philosophical worries. They touch on continuity of personhood. They also deserve gentle clarity. Psychology and neuroscience give us a compassionate answer. The infant who laughed in a picture shares your body and many of your implicit patterns. That child's sensations and attachments helped shape the neural pathways that became you. The person who remembers only from age 3 onward is not someone entirely different. They are the outcome of a developmental process. Parts of the earliest mind were reorganized. Some traces persisted in other forms. Some specific episodic content did not survive. The sense of identity you now have is continuous in important and meaningful ways, even if the subjective memory stream has gaps. There is an adaptive logic to that continuity. A brain that preserved every raw sensory fragment might be less flexible. Too much persistence can clutter the system with outdated associations. Forgetting allows learning to be prioritized in a changing environment. For an infant, the world changes quickly. The body grows. Social relationships change. A brain wired for plasticity gives the child a chance to become resilient and flexible. It can form attachments, learn language, and adopt cultural practices. That plasticity costs specific episodic memories in exchange for a richer, more adaptable mind. This perspective reframes the missing years not as a void to mourn, but as a process to respect. Your earliest life was lived. It mattered. It helped build preferences, strengths, fears, and curiosities. Those early influences show up in your tastes, in your unconscious habits, in the way you respond to certain smells or a tone of voice. They shape the scaffolding for later memory, rather than the rooms themselves. What can people do with this knowledge? First, it helps to accept that the blank is normal. It removes blame. Your brain did not fail you. It did its job. Second, if you are a caregiver, the science suggests an important practice. Talk with children about their lives. Use rich, elaborative conversation. Ask open questions and share feelings about events. Those simple habits help children build durable autobiographical memories and a coherent sense of self. Third, if you are older and feel a sense of loss, try this. Look at family stories and photos, not as evidence of a missing self, but as traces of influence. The child in the photograph lives in your mannerisms, in your attachments, in the way you narrate your life. Finally, there is a quiet wonder here. Your brain, in choosing growth over preservation, gave you the capacity to be more than what you were. You were not erased because you were unimportant. You were remodeled because the future required a different architecture. That remodeling is an act of becoming. It allowed imagination, language, and a self-reflective mind to emerge. So when the blank feels like a wound, try to reframe it as a kind of gift. You are the result of a long experiment of growth. The cost was certain personal episodes. The benefit was a mind that can tell a life in story form. It remembers who you are now. It carries the echo of who you were, and it leaves room for who you will yet become. The oldest question remains: what does it mean to be the same person over time? The science does not erase that question. It deepens it. You are continuous in many meaningful ways, and you are also shaped by processes that required loss. Both truths can live together. That tension is part of what it means to be human. If you want a practical takeaway, speak to the little ones in your life. Tell stories about shared moments. Name feelings. Ask about them. Those conversations build memory and self. For yourself, be kind. Your earliest years helped make you. They were not wasted. They were transformed into the foundations of a life that remembers, loves, and can tell its own story.